This week's show brought to you by Russell Westbrook. He's a triple threat. He's a poet, he's an artist, he's a baller. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. We're going late another week in a row, this time with very good reason. The regular season was not even wrapped up. I got some gum on my mouth, Brian. I am really flubbing this intro, but we're gonna push on. We're gonna persevere. The regular season was not even close to wrap up. On Tuesday, we were going to record, and we were like, you know what? F it. Let's wait till the season's over, and we can talk about it. So we are going to talk about the end of the NBA regular season and look at how the playoffs are looking and have some other crazy news. I may actually finally talk Billy Mitchell on the show, one of my pet projects that's been on the back burner, that's been on the back. I may actually have to talk it today, Brian, because it's breaking news, and we're going to give some love to Russell Westbrook, as you may have heard in the tease. So I'm your host, Dre Alvarez. You can find me everywhere on the internet as Nerd Numbers, and with me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, and man of two nicknames, Brian Foster.
What's going on, Dre? And you're right. We waited till the playoff brackets are set and the regular season is over, and it's here. Let's just go right to it. I'll put it up here. I'm showing CBS Sports has a very cool NBA Jam themed bracket, and this is a heck of a playoff bracket, Dre. The East matchups, I think, are almost better than the West, and the West are great too. So, man, I don't know. How do you want to get started on the playoffs? This is exciting.
So let's give a few shout-outs and some love. So Patrick, very Charlie Brownish, every year puts some bets out in Vegas. And as I've noted, if you haven't read the site and our content's dropped down to writing or listen to the podcast, I've become very curmudgeonly about predictions. In fact, one of the few posts I've written recently was at my site, nerdnumbers.com. And I basically said predictions are stupid, bah humbug, because I just pointed out the number of things that change over the course of the NBA season that render preseason predictions moot. Patrick put a bunch of money on preseason predictions. We came down to it, Brian. There was one game left. If Patrick was able to get a win out of Utah over Portland, Patrick would have easily made money this year on his portfolio. I think would have covered 2 or 3 years. And unfortunately, they came up short. So just an amazing end to the regular season where going into the last game, we didn't know if Minnesota or Denver was going to be in the playoffs. We didn't know if Portland or Utah was going to own the Northwest Division. It ended up being Oklahoma City. So just all sorts of nutties. So an amazing end. The Denver Nuggets did their damnedest. They took the Minnesota Timberwolves to overtime before losing it ultimately. An amazing output by the Nuggets, and unfortunately puts them back in their normal wheelhouse where they used to be when I started blogging, which is the Nuggets are a team with a ton of fantastic talent, with a weird combination of front office and coaching decisions that keep them from reaching their potential. Signing, I keep seeing this take everywhere on Twitter, Brian. If Millsap had been healthy, Millsap was playing like trash before he got injured and didn't really play that great before coming back. He was kind of good at the end, except he was playing good, replacing Trey Lyles, who had been playing very well. The Nuggets this offseason really, really needed to pick up 2 guards. Like, if this makes any sense, like a guard and a wing. Ideally, like a shooting guard, small forward, and a point guard. They really, really need to pick up both of those. They lucked out. They really, really lucked out into Jamal Murray developing like he did. He looked bad last season, and he turned into a slightly below average point guard according to our numbers. I get to throw in some random backpedaling. It sounds like everybody else that bitches about the position adjustment and the wins produced. So for those of you who don't know, the major thing that really differentiates the wins produced, I'm going to call this the recipe, because the wins produced formula does give you a player's production, but essentially if you look at player's production, what you'll notice is raw productivity goes to bigs. But we do something that's been done forever in baseball. We look at by position. So baseball, wins above replacement, that formula that no one knows how it works in baseball, but everybody uses. Similar in that, we basically look at wings, point guards, and bigs in the NBA. The one change that is kind of happening happily for me, from my perspective, Brian, in the NBA, is teams are realizing you don't just need one point guard. You can have multiple players that distribute the ball. And the Nuggets really, Will Barton and Jamal Murray kind of share point guard duties, even when they're on the court together. So I'd argue Jamal Murray looks a little below average. I'd argue he's probably about average when you factor in like possession. There's lots of recipe changes that I'd love to make to the wins produced formula. This is after all of the regression math. So the regression math and the wins produced formula sound. The place where we get into disagreements, and in fact, a lot of these we agree with, is things like position adjustment and how we distribute team defense. So those are the 2 most important factors that are more subjective about the wins produced formula. It's how we call which player what position, and how we distribute team defense. Because what we do right now is we just distribute team defense evenly by time on the court. So basically, if the team has a good defense, you played 1/10 of their time, you get 1/10 of their defense. And then, of course, we look at Basketball Reference and or NBA.com, grab a player's position, and then do a small amount of smoothing about that. But that's the positions. We could make some marginal adjustments to that. What is key, I would note, is barring players like Giannis Antetokounmpo and Ben Simmons, this is not a major problem for most players. It only really becomes a player when you have a player or a couple players where you're like, they're kind of a guard center. So that's kind of hard. But anyway, that being said, the Nuggets lucked out into Jamal Murray having a really big jump in his second year. So he was actually a competent NBA point guard, which they needed, but they needed a couple more. But they spent $30 million on Paul Millsap. And even the people arguing this kind of logic, well, they needed to spend the money because if they didn't spend the money, they lost the cap flexibility. It's like they could have done what the Philadelphia 76ers did.
Yeah.
They could have overpaid a point guard. They could have overpaid George Hill. George Hill, I think, went to Sacramento for $20 million, which is a little more than I would like to pay for him. We could have done that. The Nuggets have done this forever. They've had some amazing players. Back in the day, they had players like Marcus Camby and Andre Miller-Nene, and they overpaid for players like Kenyon Martin and didn't have the good pieces around him. Carmelo Anthony was overpaid, of course. They had like Kenneth Faried and Chauncey Billups and didn't quite get over the hump. But actually, I argue they did there. They just didn't quite succeed in the playoffs, right? With like Chauncey Billups and Andre Iguodala and Kenneth Faried and those kind of players back in that day, they actually did really well. They just didn't quite capitalize. But, the Nuggets right now with Jamal Murray, Gary Harris, Will Barton, and Nikola Jokic, that is an amazing four to start with. And then we have players like Wilson Chandler and Paul Millsap. And, we liked him in his prime, Devin Harris, but he's over the hill. It's like they're four pieces. They just need one more productive player as like their sixth person. Like Paul Millsap shouldn't be their starter. They could do it, Brian, but they just don't. But, that's what we're probably looking forward to with the Nuggets. A mid-40s win team that underperforms, that Dre bitches about, but can't give up because he loves Jokic too much. So those are my two shout-outs to, the Utah Jazz and the Denver Nuggets for how they ended the season. Patrick, man, has to be kind of half happy. The Minnesota Timberwolves made the playoffs. This is a team that we have the same boat as the Denver Nuggets. Have some amazing talent, but with bad players like Andrew Wiggins are just always going to underperform their potential. But they're in the playoffs for, I think, the first time in 14 seasons.
Yeah, something like that. And just my comments on the Nuggets is, if we go over to the 2018 season here on Basketball Reference again. So I said earlier that the East playoff matchups are pretty amazing, and I think they are. But the East was worse than the West this year. If you look at like team records, it's pretty close. But if you're looking at point margin and SRS, like the Nuggets were the 11th best team in the NBA, Dre. They were better than several, East playoff teams. They were better than Indiana. They were better than Cleveland Cavaliers in point margin. Better than the Wizards, better than the Heat. So
yeah, I mean that was also very classic Nuggets, right? Where you have this mid-40s team or 50-win team out west where it's just amazingly strong. And this season's funny. I think this season's the first season in a few years, quite a couple, where there've only been like 2 50-win teams out west, which is nuts. I will say the following: we've got to give kind of a historical shout out to the Oklahoma City Thunder, Seattle Supersonics, however you want to phrase that. That team had the biggest influence on the landscape of the NBA, I think, of any individual team in terms of like a talent pool. If that team re-signs James Harden, just gives him the $4 million. I've written about this ad nauseum many times, not this year, but I've got lots of them in my portfolio of writing. So what ended up happening is, as if you don't know NBA history, Seattle Supersonics are in Seattle. They get bought by a new owner, Clay Bennett, who is an Oklahoma City native, I believe, or lives in Oklahoma, something like that. He wants to move the team to Oklahoma City, very major league, bad 1980s movie, good or bad, what you can call it, whatever you want. And he winds up doing it. And it's very overt, where the team wants to stay in Seattle, the fans want them to stay in Seattle, but the city doesn't want to give them the money, which normally we're fine with. Like, we think it's stupid for cities to pay for teams, but in this case, there were Microsoft billionaires that were willing to come in and pay for the team. But the NBA was having none of that and moved the team to Oklahoma City. Because they're in Oklahoma City, they argue, these are billionaires. This is what gets ridiculous, right, Brian? When a billionaire says, I don't have the money to do that, you kind of go, really? So argue they didn't have the money to sign James Harden, which amounted to about $4 million a season. James Harden goes to Houston, where he's likely going to win the MVP this season. The Oklahoma City Thunder, after making the finals with James Harden, never make the finals again, resulting in eventually Kevin Durant leaving for the Golden State Warriors. And so now the Oklahoma City Thunder are a very good team. I mean, they're a 48-win team. And a shout out to the Oklahoma City Thunder. At the beginning of the season, we were dour on them. I made lots of prognostications, which seemed like they came true, but to our own form, to be fair, my prediction was right, but for the wrong reasons. Because I argued that the Oklahoma City Thunder were going to be a mid-40s win team for the following reasons. I didn't anticipate Paul George bouncing back as good as he did, which he did. I didn't anticipate the growth of Steven Adams and Andre Roberson, who both played amazing. And Carmelo Anthony, some credit to him, was useful on D. This team did way better on D than I was expecting, given a beat-up Paul George or Carmelo Anthony. I anticipated Carmelo Anthony was going to struggle on offense, which he did. But this Thunder's team would have won mid-50s in terms of wins if Andre Roberson doesn't go down injured mid-season. So I said they were like a mid-40s win team. I was kind of right. They won 48 games. So they outperformed what I thought by about 2 wins. I think I pegged them at 46 at one point. But the Thunder, this is a 48-win team without Kevin Durant. And they could have at one point, if they wanted to, just put all the money in it, kept Kevin Durant and James Harden. But because they didn't, look at what they did. They made the Houston Rockets. They made the Golden State Warriors. This team completely changed the landscape of the Western Conference, and it's because the NBA was willing to let an owner basically hold up 2 cities for money. First, he held up Seattle, and they said no, and then he held up OKC, and OKC said, we want a team, we'll give you $250 million or something like that for a stadium.
Yeah, and it's funny, Trey, you mentioned all those players. There's an NBA playoff image with all the stars and the NBA logo and everything that they always put up every year. So I just slapped that on to our show this week. And who are those players that just happen to be in this image? It's Harden and Durant, right? The former Oklahoma City players who are leading, the 2 best teams. Well, I guess Golden State's not anymore, but for most of the year they were. So anyway, yeah, your point stands. And you know what? It's interesting to me. So first of all, clearly they have made bad personnel choices, and you mentioned some of them. Interestingly, the player that they picked over Harden, Kendrick Perkins, is back in the NBA and on the Cavaliers roster this offseason, which is kind of surprising. But yeah, I mean, Sam Presti, we don't think he's as good as some other people think, in terms of these personnel decisions. But on the other hand, I wonder about Westbrook's personality. As good as a player as he is, I wonder if, Harden didn't have much choice, but I wonder if Durant did want to move away from Westbrook based on that. So
what we've stated, and I think I do think this is true, and I could be wrong, because it is hard to predict the personalities of players. In the NBA, successful teams break up all the time. We saw Shaq and Penny break up, but Shaq and Penny, for instance, broke up. We just said OKC. There have been other successful teams that kind of break up. It is really, really hard to break up a team after they win a title. And in fact, usually kind of teams that have, Shaq and Kobe, right? They were at odds with each other, but when they're winning titles, it's fine. It's when they lose in the finals where everything finally comes to a head. So it's kind of like my template is the 1990 Chicago Bulls. There's a book called The Jordan Rules that has this reporter whose name I always forget. I'm going to look up this up one of these days, Brian, who was following around the Bulls for the 1990-1991 season. And Michael Jordan's upset with the team, and he thinks Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant are soft, and he doesn't think the front office is doing enough to get around him. Don't forget that Michael Jordan took a really long time before he was a winner in the NBA in terms of winning titles. It took him many, many seasons. He was drafted in 1984. He didn't win a title until 1991. So there you go. So all this is going on, but then they win a title, and Michael Jordan sticks with the team for 3 seasons. And, he does retire, but it's after winning a 3-peat and in response to his dad's death. And, the conspiracy theory being that Howard Stern at the time said his gambling was out of control and was hurting him, and kind of said, gave him an unannounced suspension. So the real world didn't know it, but basically Michael Jordan was told you're suspended for 2 seasons. It may or may not be true. So, all of that happened. But so had the Oklahoma City Thunder, who made the finals, had they made another finals and won one, it's hard to I'm not saying Kevin Durant wouldn't have wanted to leave, but I think it would have been harder for him to leave. And certainly James Harden just wanted the money. He asked for the money and they said no. So it all comes down to the fact that this team basically shaped the landscape of the modern playoffs. Let's get into the playoffs. Let's get into some of that. So this is interesting, Brian. I believe you've put some odds on the script. Just to clarify, these are the odds currently for the first game of the playoffs, right? Not for the whole playoffs.
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure. Yes, they are.
So, but here's what's fascinating about that on two fronts. According to these odds, San Antonio is the favorite against Golden State. Washington is the favorite against Toronto. Now, we should be clear about betting odds. Betting odds can be based on how much action is coming into the game. So sometimes if there are people who are really exuberant about a team and want to really bet hard, that can change it, because the ideal world for betting sites is the following. I want to have the exact same amount of money on both sides of a bet, and so I just collect the rake. That's the ideal world. Now, that doesn't always happen, right? Sometimes Vegas sets the odds and more people bet on, say, the Patriots than the opponent, and then if things go wrong, they lose a lot of money. But the idea that can happen here. But let's break this down. Let's just go series by series, kind of do, as I mentioned, what I'm going to do is kind of just give some gut checks and then give some advice that I have from years of doing this. We have not done the hard work of analyzing these series, and I'll give some explanations as to why and my thoughts on, if you are going to prognosticate the playoffs, what I think about that. Because we in general think predictions are really hard, and I think a lot of people fall in love with this model says this or whatever, without realizing that for small sample size things, small things matter, which makes these harder to do and not as much fun. I mean, the simple model I'd give you, by the way, if you were trying to do this, try and estimate each team's playoff rotations, find their adjusted per production, just their raw production. You can look 80 JP 48, line those up next to each other, factor in something for home court, just do that and do that for each series. That's your best bet. But even then, a player can go off. That we've seen that happen in the playoffs. A player can go off, a player can get injured. Who knows? But let's run down some of our thoughts. Now, Brian, the first series, there's a lot to say here. San Antonio versus Golden State. Currently, the bettors are on San Antonio to win the opener of it, which is, if I was Golden State, I would be troubled by this. Now, I'm not as sold. Here's some gut check things. Saw some people putting some numbers across the wire today. San Antonio got most of their wins against bad teams. They're actually not a great team against good teams this season. Additionally, they don't have Kawhi. They're a little older. They've always kind of relied on their depth. I wouldn't be sold. Kevin Durant is better than any player on the Spurs if Kawhi doesn't play by a large margin. That being said, your team is without Steph Curry, and your team, same kind of problem as the Nuggets, did not get adequate backups at point guards and had some problems. Sean Livingston's getting older. Andre Iguodala's getting older. Nick Young and Quinn Cook are not players you really want to have a lot of time with. So I think Golden State takes it, but I think San Antonio has a possibility of an upset. And if Kawhi comes back, I turn them into the favorites.
Yeah, and it sounds like he's going to play in game one. So
what?
Yeah.
Is this verified? Can you give me?
I can look around, but earlier today looked like that was going to be what the answer was. Now the question is, does that mean he plays game two? How many minutes does he play in game one? So we'll have to see. But yeah, I mean, I guess, I've saw people like Arturo saying, well, there's bad blood from last year and all that because he got hurt playing the Warriors. And so, of course, he's going to play in this series. But, yeah, I mean, it's
making a joke to a friend of mine about this scenario, which is kind of like, if it's really hard to know what the hell's going on with Kawhi. And I get really trepidatious with the amount of speculation on Twitter because we're all just going off of secondhand info that's coming through Woj, which I'm not a fan of. We don't know the medical situation. I actually, it's one of my big pet peeves, is trying to judge the medical situation of players. And then this weird mentality, my favorite example I've given of the mentality of like calling players soft or weak or whatever, is I was watching this documentary on a boxer. I'm forgetting the name because it was against Sugar Ray. It was the No Mas fight. So I'm feeling really bad. I'm forgetting his name. But there's an amazing boxer.
Oh, that's Roberto Duran in the No Mas fight. Right?
Boom! Thank you. You're on the ball. So in the second fight with him, he I guess he was looking like out of shape, and so I saw these talking heads talking about how out of shape he looked, And I'm like, I'm looking at all these old, really out of shape, overweight white guys talking about this boxer who has gone to like 8 rounds against Sugar Ray, but is getting beat up. And they're talking about how out of shape he looks. I'm like, this is kind of weird. So I get the same thing. None of us are doctors. We don't have access to Kawhi's medical records. So I get really trepidation. People are like, looks like he's faking it. We don't know. But if Kawhi has been doing this as like as a bargaining thing, as a strategic thing to get off the thing, I kind of equate it to like you called in sick to work, and then your boss calls to ask you for something, and you're like, that's really important. I need to do that. You're like, but if I do that, I have to reveal I wasn't sick. So Kawhi might be in that situation right now, but we'll see.
Well, so I guess it's not for sure yet, but people suspect it's going to happen. So here's from Jacob Soska, ESPN reporting Spurs star Kawhi Leonard's return to San Antonio to resume working with the team. There's hope of a return to first game versus Golden State. League sources tell ESPN.
Well, I agree with Vegas on so the bet I don't understand. So I agree with Vegas on their bet. So Vegas says that they think San Antonio is a 54-46 favorite in the opening game against Golden State. Kawhi's back. That's scary. So I think you're not dead yet, Brian. And basically the playoffs for the Warriors really rest on Steph Curry's health. I think the good news about the Rockets, and we'll get to them in a second, is they do have some weaknesses, even though they are an amazing squad. But that being said, I give this series a coin flip. I don't know what you give it. Based on how things stand now, not knowing Kawhi's health, not knowing everything, with the information we have today as of this recording, I say this series is a coin flip, and the edge is just kind of that the Warriors have home court.
I'll agree. I kind of want to give the Spurs an edge, but I think this Leonard news is not solid enough to do that. So, yeah. And, one thing on the Warriors is, so we were talking about this a little before the show. Like, I just want to use the eye test here because, like they say in Moneyball, numbers don't work in the play. My shit doesn't work in the playoffs, right? Very small sample size. So we're going off the eye test.
You just made me realize a quote that I like using, Brian, that, kind of I came up with, but I'm realizing I basically modified that one I've said in the playoffs, by the time regression to the mean is kicked in, the series can be over. So that's my, it's like, just because the numbers say this team is better than that team, this other team gets off to a 2-0 start. And guess what? Even if you're a 60-40 coin, but you start with two heads, you could really pick up those other two heads, even though it's supposed to be, only 40% at each head.
Yeah, and, missing Steph Curry is so huge. Like, the Warriors dip down below 6 SRS, and Curry alone is worth more than 6 points over par. So, in theory, they're like an average team without Curry, but... we'll see. Like, I don't think that's true. I don't think that works out. Like, I think they'll be okay.
I stick with my logic though. Just let the Warriors, both in terms of Durant, which people like super team overkill, and what they did with Nick Young, no bad play. You can never have too many good players on an NBA squad because injuries really suck. And
They've looked bad on defense and tired and kind of lethargic, and that makes sense when it's the end of the season. A bunch of your guys are hurt, right? They've looked even worse on offense without Curry. Thompson and Durant have just kind of gone Kobe mode, right? They've kind of gone into ISO ball. Yeah. And Iguodala hasn't been playing either. So without Iguodala or Curry, it's really like only Draymond Green is their real like elite point guard level distributor who's out there, and he's been dinged up too. So yeah, the Warriors look really bad. They lost by 40 points to the Jazz, and they just looked way like a much worse team. So, of course, the Jazz got beat up, by the next day by Portland, and that's a small sample size as well. But if we're just talking about right now and the eye test, the Warriors look terrible.
Can I throw out a tinfoil hat thing that Arturo brings up every playoffs, but I don't know if I can dispute?
Sure.
So he calls it like we've noticed players like Dwayne Wade, who are older players that look like they're losing a step, and then they suddenly look a little better when they hit the playoffs. Apparently, I think this is true. So in the comments or on Twitter, correct me if I'm wrong, the NBA drug testing doesn't occur in the postseason, but they do have drug testing in the regular season. So there is this idea that in the postseason, there might be other things at play that help improve player performance. Additionally, there's more rest between games, and who you're.
Yeah.
So in terms of getting the Warriors as healthy as they can be for their games, they're in the best situation they can be in. But who even knows? But yeah, I think it's just I like how the season played out, even though it's against your team, Brian, which is I get so damn sick of the enthusiasm people have about good players or good teams. We're going to talk Donovan Mitchell in a bit, and all of this assumption of, it's guaranteed he's going to be great. It's like, do you watch sports? We have seen so many good players lose their career to injury or lose their career to just, going off the rails or having a fight with a coach. It's like, it is not a given.
He could be the next Brandon Roy for all we know.
Exactly. It is not a given in sports that a great player or a great team lives up to their potential. And it's especially true because their time frame is so fleeting, right? An average player's career is like 6 seasons. Even the greatest ones we've seen, right? Like something that's remarkable is like LeBron James had like 15 straight seasons of amazingness, which is absurd. But that's still less than 2 decades. Dirk Nowitzki, he's entering his 21st season of an NBA career, which is absurd. But that is not the norm, right? Most players don't last that long. And the rules in like the CBA mean that most squads, in terms of keeping the same core together, has about 5 or 6 seasons before it becomes untenable. So this belief that it's unfair for a super squad to form without acknowledging that a few key injuries to key players at the right time, and for what it's worth, right? The Rockets were in a similar boat. Chris Paul got injured, but what was the advantage? Chris Paul's injuries were at the beginning of the season. Steph Curry's injuries were at the end of the season. Just getting your player injured at the right or wrong time is a huge difference. So it's like I kind of like this season in that everybody thought when Durant signed with the Warriors, game over. This is so stupid. The Warriors are just going to rule the NBA for the next 5 years. Remember when LeBron James joined the Heat, he was like not 6, not 7, but like 8 titles or whatever. It's like you got 4. You got 4 trips to the finals, which is remarkable. You got 2 titles and 4 trips to the finals, which is damned remarkable. But that's almost peak what you could have expected out of those contracts and those players. So I do kind of like that the Warriors are showing people what we've already known about sports, which is that greatness in professional sports is fragile.
Yeah, and if we're gonna be Bayesians like we always like to be, if we're gonna look at just the odds of what's gonna happen with the Warriors, like this team should be finished, right? Like the odds are they're done. They could win this year. Like Neil Payne says it's 8% at this point. It's probably a little higher than that, but whatever. It's not great odds, right? And then coming into next year, are they going to be the favorites next year? Like if Houston wins it and brings back the same team, probably not. Boston's going to get their Irvings
Houston, so let's give this to Houston because I was looking this up. We'll see how much we talk Philadelphia. Amazing work to get that.
Well, just to finish that up, I think if you're a betting man, you'd say this Warriors team is done winning titles.
No. I don't. I mean, in the fairness of
I'm just saying over the next 3 to 4 years, if they keep the same core together, like what's the most likely number of titles for them to win? I would say probably 0, maybe 1.
Well, let's be fair. So here's the key on what you're saying. Let's just acknowledge that winning a title is really hard, even if you're a great team. Because even if, let's say, you were we've done the very boring intro to statistics test. Let's assume you were like an 80-20, 80-20, 80-20 favorite in the first 3 rounds of the playoffs and like a 60-40. Let's say you do those odds and we've calculated out. That was like Patrick's reasoning for why he took the field versus Golden State to win a title this year. Because he basically said, even if we think the Warriors, which they were at the beginning of the season, are an overwhelming favorite, you can just statistically break down that, like your odds are like 30% to win a title, even if we give you those starters, right? 80-20, 80-20, 70-30, 60-40, or something like that. Multiply that over multiple years, to your point. So all I'm going to say about the Warriors is they have Steph Curry, and we don't know his status. They have Kevin Durant. They have Draymond Green. Those 3 players are all elite. That's a top 5 power forward, a top 5 small forward, and a top 5 point guard on the team. Klay Thompson is still young, and in theory, this is what's actually made the Warriors frustrating to me, and makes lots of teams frustrating to me. In theory, if you have multiple stars, that's the hard part. Let's give a little credit to Daryl Morey. We're just going to be all over the place, so I hope that works. But I'll make sure we go.
I'm pretty much done with the Warriors. I mean, the last thing I was going to say is they have to be sure to play big men. They have been the last couple of months. And Looney is playing out of his mind right now. McGee is still playing well. Pachulia's not bad. So if they play bigs versus San Antonio, I think they'll be fine.
But no, but just to that point of what we're saying, the hard part in the NBA is acquiring a star, which is one reason, like, despite the fact that we kind of hop back and forth on how great we think Daryl Morey is doing, the reason he's above bar for us is he's a guy that gets those home run hits, right? He gets Dwight Howard's and James Paul would be impressive. James Harden, Chris Paul, right? That's the key. In the NBA, to win, you need to get one or two stars. We talked to Hinkie about this, like the acquiring multiple stars theory. So the Warriors have multiple MVP caliber players. And as long as you've got that, you have a shot at a title. It's just what they do around it. This last season, I think they were complacent, which is fine. And they basically said, we don't need to worry as much. But and also, just to their credit, though, they picked up Jordan Bell, who looked great from the draft. And they picked up Omri Caspi, who was looking great. But then the problem, right, is they also picked up Nick Young. They picked up Quinn Cook. Then Caspi got injured. So it's like, I don't think they did a bad job. I think they did like C+ work in terms of their moves in this offseason. But I think people have to recognize that if you have a star player on your team, don't waste your time with a star. You don't have time to dick around, get good players. So sorry about that. And then back to my point on Chris Paul and the Rockets. Chris Paul is really old because I was looking at the 76ers, and Ben Simmons is remarkable. Here's the stat I was tweeting out this week that I'm proud of and bodes very well for Ben Simmons. I said, like, Ben Simmons is better than Embiid. People are like, how dare you? I've said Ben Simmons is easily the rookie of the year. Luckily, most people agree. And here is just a stat line. As a rookie, Ben Simmons is putting up 15 points on above average true shooting, eight assists and 8 rebounds. All of the players that have done this, let's see if I can list them all: Wilt Chamberlain, Oscar Robertson, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, James Harden, and I think I'm missing one or two others. Russell Westbrook. There we go. And there's at least one other, I think. All of the players that have ever had a season with that stat line have won an MVP in the NBA as long as James Harden wins it this season. That is ridiculous. He's doing it as a rookie. He's the only player in NBA history since Oscar Robertson to put up 15, 8, and 8 as a rookie. And then a thing that we've brought up before about Russell Westbrook, comparing him to Oscar Robertson, is if you look at the pace of play during Oscar Robertson's era versus modern era, if you're putting up stat lines like Oscar Robertson in the modern NBA, which means you're not playing 40 minutes a game, which means the pace isn't 110 on average, that is just freaking remarkable. So Ben Simmons, as a rookie, is putting up MVP caliber player numbers already. According to the age curve, he only has one place to go, which is up. But again, he's the best rookie, I would argue, since Chris Paul. Chris Paul entered the league in 2006. So that's like a once in almost 15-year-ish player. So to our star point, and even to Chris Paul, the Rockets are kind of old. So, injuries to Chris Paul and James Harden, those players have both been in the year forever. We don't know the odds of teams winning a title because it's just really hard to do. So we don't know the capper. I think the Warriors, as long as they recoup and are smart about this, they're fine. They have a shot at the title this year. They have a shot at the title going forward. But to your point, like, of course you don't bet on it, especially now that they're another couple of good teams.
They're in great shape as a franchise. It's just the whole concept that, everyone should tank because no one has a chance to beat the Warriors. Obviously, that's stupid.
Let's get some love to Washington. I don't understand this bet. So Washington versus Toronto, say it right. The opening game, Vegas currently has Washington as the favorites, 56-44, which I do not understand for a minute. Washington did not end out strong. They went on a losing streak. Yeah. Toronto, as you've noted, I can't help myself to say it the right way, Brian, which is, you try and forget syllables if you can. But Toronto has the third best, I think, is it second best, right? Are they up just behind the Rockets now?
Oh, if you're talking about point margin, yeah. They almost passed the Rockets at the end of the year. They were second in point margin, 7.29 SRS. That's pretty damn good.
So let's just give some like gut feel stuff about Toronto. My point about Toronto is they might fall for the Spurs 2 seasons ago when they lost to the Oklahoma City Thunder in the playoffs, which is they're a very deep team, but the playoffs is more of a sprint than a marathon.
Yeah.
This means depth doesn't help you as much. And they have a Nuggets problem. They have a lot of really good bigs, but that's redundancy, which means it doesn't help you as much, which means if you're playing Giannis 40 minutes, it doesn't matter if your backup's pretty good. The problem is Giannis is better than both of those. And one of their best players, Jonas Valanciunas, they don't seem to like playing him a lot of minutes. So if they don't give him minutes in the playoffs, I'm worried about him. That being said, they are a significantly better team than Washington. I don't think this just from back of the napkin stuff. I think Toronto should take like Washington in 5, and I think they should win the home opener. So I'm kind of baffled by Vegas or the betting sites that you went to. I think you went to like Sportsbook or whatever, right?
Yeah, I've looked at a few, and they're pretty similar. There's a few things. Well, first of all, Toronto, I think, is a notorious playoff choker, is the general perception. Now, we know that's because of injuries.
Finals 2 seasons ago, so I don't even know what people are talking about.
Well, and then the other thing is they are a Canadian team, right? And Washington Wizards are in Washington, D.C., America's capital. So if you're talking about getting money on both sides of the line, I think the American team is going to have more like money than the Canadian team probably. So those are probably 2 of the main reasons.
But I just got to say, I think Toronto takes this one handily. I'm confused by that opening bet, but we like Toronto. Sorry, we've wasted so much time on the teams we like. I already gave some thoughts on Philly. Philly, I think, I don't even think it's a dark horse. I'm seeing people list them correctly. From top to bottom, Philly, if Embiid comes back even 80%, is the most complete team in the playoffs, meaning they don't have any weaknesses. To recap, the Golden State Warriors, especially without Steph Curry, are very weak. And when you factor in the fact that Nick Young and Sean Livingston are primary players in the rotation, even including Curry, that's a major weakness. The Houston Rockets give major minutes to Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson. That's a problem. The Cleveland Cavaliers, they just have lots of holes on their squad, so not even going there. Boston, with the loss of Kyrie Irving, just have lots of problems as well and don't even have a star. So the Philadelphia 76ers, if you're looking for a star player, that's Ben Simmons, who's like a top 10 player in the NBA. Ben Simmons is a top 10 player. They're complete 1 to 7, meaning all of their 1 to 7 players. If you go to the Philadelphia 76ers, I believe it's like Simmons, Embiid, Covington, TJ McConnell, Dario Saric, one other. They're all above average. So it's like this team is the most playoff built team. The ding against them, and we've seen this before, is young teams tend to struggle in the playoffs. Young players tend to not get star calls, but they're my favorite. So they're, at least Vegas has this right. They're the favorite against Miami in the opening game. I like Miami. We love Hassan Whiteside. We think Spoelstra's a good coach. I think this series goes 5. Do you have a difference on that? 5 to Philly.
Yeah, and another crazy thing to throw into the mix here is that Fultz kind of came out of nowhere and got a triple-double yesterday and became the youngest ever player to get a triple-double. Now, obviously, he's a complete wild card. We have no idea what he's going to do in the playoffs, but if they give him minutes, like what is that going to mean? One kind of weird thing about Philadelphia is they're a team that kind of can't play 2 point guards together because both Simmons and McConnell can't shoot that well from 3, even though saying they're bad shooters is dumb, obviously.
Who cares?
No, so that's but Redick has been good, and I mean I think they're a strong team. Like I think you're right that they should be one of the favorites
from outside. Like that's what's if you have a team. So sorry, I was kind of rude to you, Brian.
Who cares, Dre? Tell us why.
We're gonna do like the rock back and forth. Like, what do you think? Okay, sorry. Friend of mine used to that's a fun game if you've never done that, by the way. If you aren't fans of The Rock, we won't have time to talk WrestleMania. It didn't get me interested. I have not resubscribed. But that was one of The Rock's gimmicks, is he would get someone talking and then right in the middle he would cut them off and say no one cares. Okay. But that being said, I understand the logic of saying so and so isn't a 3-point shooter if you hired them to be a 3-point shooter. And teams need outside shooters. But you have 5 players on the court at a given time. If 3 of them can shoot, 3 are from outside, and Embiid and Covington and Redick all can. And in fact, I think maybe a couple others on the team. So it's like, it's weird logic to me to say these 2 players can't shoot 3, so they're a problem. What I'll say, because we might talk Donovan Mitchell in a minute, I would rather have Ben Simmons space the floor by driving the ball and kicking it to an established 3-point shooter than have Donovan Mitchell space the floor by taking a 33% 3-point shot, which is below league average. So that being said, Fultz, I think, is in an interesting position because we have him below average, according to us, but he's too hard because he was really bad in his first couple of games in the season, and he's only played like 14 games. So his last couple have been really good. I'll need to look at that. But yeah, the 76ers, I kind of, the last note I'll give on this series, the 76ers versus the Heat, is that I feel bad for the Heat because they played through injuries. won their division, and as thanks, they get to play the Philadelphia 76ers. So that just seems kind of mean.
Yeah, well, that's what they get for benching Whiteside in the last game. No, that didn't matter at all. But no, I mean, yeah, Whiteside's really good, and I can see him, being good enough to win a couple of games. But yeah, it's gonna be tough.
The bettors like, at least for the game opener, which I believe Portland is the home team, they like New Orleans over Portland. Anthony Davis is better. This is an interesting one. I've not done enough analysis because I'd say the playoff rotation, if you're looking at Rajon Rondo, Anthony Davis, what is it? Drew Holiday's the other one. This team, New Orleans has more power. Lillard's really good, and the Portland defense, I have no idea. I'm going to give New Orleans versus Portland a solid. I don't know. It's a little weird not to see the home court team not get the edge, which is Portland. I'm gonna say who knows. Ask you what you think, and we'll move on to the next team. New Orleans versus Portland.
Yeah, that could be the Portland is kind of on a losing streak right now. Like they won that last game to win the division and not, give Patrick $3,000 and Utah Jazz the division title. But they were ahead in that division for a long, long time. So that's probably, reaction to their recent poor play. But that being said, who's the other team? I forgot already. New Orleans, they are the weakest Western playoff team in terms of margin of victory. So Anthony Davis is obviously an amazing player.
Amazing this season.
And he had a great year, and he seems fully healthy. And anytime he's there, like he could carry them all the way. But the rest of the team looks pretty weak.
So I'm going to steal a prediction for the next series, which is Milwaukee versus Boston. It's not mine, it's a friend's, but I'm going to say Bucks in 6. That's a fan response. I will say the following. Boston has had this problem 2 years in a row now. They're a good team without a star. We're kind of like a star as like a top 10 NBA player. And they lost one of their best players, who is Kyrie Irving, who, that is a big, when you're talking like this, the same thing. When you look at the Warriors SRS, that's baked in all of the games that Curry played. So when Curry's off the court, you have to say they have an SRS of 6 or whatever, but they don't have Curry right now. So they're even worse than they appear. Whatever the Boston Celtics SRS is, they're even worse than they appear because Kyrie Irving, he put a little bit of egg on our face where, not to a huge degree. I just said he was kind of overrated, but he actually lived up to it. And basically has me on the Brad Stevens Coach of the Year bandwagon. I think if the 76ers, if the Bucks were a little more well coached, I'd be way more confident in that. They have a much better star. Giannis is amazing. They have a better, I think if they play a playoff rotation, which means give more minutes to their top players, Giannis, Eric Bledsoe. You've got the Tony Snell, there's nothing well line. He is below average, but he's still close to it. So it's like, if the Bucks play their top lineup a lot of minutes, I think they can beat Boston, but I got to give Boston the wild card of both home court and Brad Stevens. I think that it's entirely possible Milwaukee makes some mistakes, but I got a gut feel that Milwaukee advances to the next round. Any thoughts?
It's hard to fight against that logic, which is in a playoff series where the benches are shortened, who is the best player in the series? And it's easily Giannis. But I think the Celtics are still favored. Their defense is really good. The best in the league, in fact, even better than Utah. So I think they still got a good chance. And, all their young players are not quite stars yet. Brown, Tatum, all those guys. But I think any of them are capable of stepping up. And there's enough of them that they should be okay. But, yeah, we'll see. That's a tough series.
Indiana versus Cleveland is fascinating. So this one's weird for a few reasons. Cleveland's SRS is actually worse than Indiana, but don't forget, they had that stretch in the middle of the season where everything looked lost and then they completely revamped their roster. And we know LeBron James has playoff mode, which is he plays over 40 minutes a game. And Victor Oladipo, who looked like the best player in the NBA to start the season, has been on a downhill trend. I give this series to Cleveland, but I think it's more of a fight. I think it goes 6, and I think there are a couple close games, but I give it to Cleveland.
I think Cleveland should be a big favorite here because
I think it's closer than it looks, though. That's my take. I'd like to give.
Well, let's see. Let's go over what is. I haven't looked at the Vegas odds yet. Did they think?
They think
it's a slight favorite.
Opener, basically.
No, I think Cleveland's probably a bigger favorite than conventional wisdom will say, just because I think they're healthier now than they have been earlier, and also that their big men tend to get really disrespected. Like I don't think people think Tristan Thompson or even Kevin Love are that as big of a factor anymore. And I think those guys are really good. And let's not forget Larry Nance Jr. as well came over from the Lakers. So, yeah, I think Cleveland is stacked and their defense is very questionable. But, as good as Indiana was and kind of came out of nowhere, even though I think Patrick had the over on them, I think they're significantly less talent on Indiana.
The numbers don't agree. I mean, the numbers say they're pretty. I mean, if we're going like the lot.
No, Boston. You're right. They're both mediocre. Like if we're going to go back to SRS here, they're both very mediocre teams, worse than many teams in the West. But I think Cleveland's is stronger now than they were for much of the season when they put up this low SRS number.
They got the best player. That's the point. LeBron James
that's a great point.
Earns the MVP this season. It's remarkable. The fact that team won 50 games this season is freaking stupid. The fact that LeBron James' streak of 50-win seasons outlasted the San Antonio Spurs, I would not have called midseason. So we got to give it to that. But yeah, I think it's just going to be a little scrappier than people realize. But I think LeBron pulls them out. This next one, I really think Oklahoma City is the better team for a lot of reasons.
Interesting.
Well, okay, let's look at this. Oklahoma City has Steve Adams, Russell Westbrook, who are great. I do think, honestly, Donovan Mitchell is, we think he's overrated. And I think that their defense can give him fits. Like we've seen that, right? Donovan Mitchell can tear up, a lot of players do, right? Can tear up weaker teams. But now he's playing a more coached team that has more experience in the playoffs. I give this one to OKC. I would love to see Utah advance. Rudy Gobert is one of our dark horse every year MVP candidates. On a personal note, I don't want to see Donovan Mitchell get any more accolades. So that's my pettiness, but I love Gobert. It's a very hard one. I'm like, I love Gobert. I hate Donovan Mitchell fans. I really want to stress this. Like Donovan Mitchell fans, I've had years of Kobe fans. I really want to stress this. I actually think I love Lakers fans over the years of doing this. Lakers fans that realize Kobe is great, but was not the key piece. I don't want to say key. Not the most important piece, I'll phrase that, to their title runs, that realize it was Shaq back in the day, and then it was Pow in the modern ones. Those people I love. Those Laker fans are some of the most astute. It's the people that think Kobe won everything, that Kobe put Shaq on his shoulders and won 3 titles, and then put Pow on his shoulders and won another 2. Those are the ones I hate. The Jazz fans that are convinced Donovan Mitchell is the reason this team is winning are now they now rank below or above, however you want to phrase it, Kobe fans to me. They drive me crazy. So I would like to see success for Utah, but I would prefer to see success for OKC. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Russell Westbrook in a bit. I love a statement he made, so we'll have to talk that. But I think it's a close series. I'll tell you what, it's going to go the distance. It's going to go 7. OKC wins in Game 7.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. They are the home team, so that's a big advantage. Utah is playing really well in general right now, so I guess I'll favor them, but it is. It is the 4-5 matchup, right? So it's close. So Oklahoma City is one of those teams where their talent is like clustered into a few players. They've got a lot of bad players, but then like especially Westbrook and Adams, but also George as well is playing better. And if those 3 could just kind of carry them through. So, and like we've been saying, their defense is great. Patrick pointed out that Ricky Rubio has been better lately for Utah, and when I've been watching some Utah games lately, that starting 5 is looking really, really good. Now, let's be fair. Jay Crowder has been
terrible.
Put up one of the worst bodies of work in the entire NBA this year. Like it was a really bad season. He's been looking a little better. He did move around to several different teams, so now that he's settled in Utah, maybe he'll be playing a little better, but whenever you got Favors and Gobert, with those 2 big men playing a traditional, big lineup, I don't know. I think that's a really scary team. They're going to crush the smaller Oklahoma City probably on the boards, despite Adams playing so well. So we'll see. I'm favoring Utah a little bit.
Okay. I love it. Okay. Last one. I don't think it's a problem. Houston versus Minnesota. I think we got to be misreading these odds, man. I don't think these are right.
This is just for the first game, I think. Yeah.
no way Minnesota's the favorite. I think we're misreading the odds. I apologize to bettors out there. So I'm just
No,
going
no,
to say
this says Houston -10. This should be right.
how.
Isn't Houston 10-point favorite? Isn't that means?
Okay. I was misreading it. I thought that 52-48 meant that Minnesota was the favorite. Okay. I was misreading this. Apologies. Okay, so Minnesota versus Houston. I think this series is over in 4. I think Karl Anthony Towns puts up a great game. It's not going to be close. Houston's just that much better, and they're healthy.
Yeah, the one thing about this series is Houston did totally dominate the regular series. Like, it was really ugly. So you're probably right. The one wild card, though, is that Jimmy Butler is back. He's played, I think, 3 games already and looked really good. And of course, Towns has just been amazing this year. So they have a chance, but Houston is the best team, and they should be a big favorite.
Well, I mean, this was freaking crazy. I know I was looking this stat up. This team won 65 games, and that's with Chris Paul missing over 20, which is ridiculous. And I looked at the win record between the two. Their win record with like Chris Paul in like the games that Chris Paul played, right, is like 80-some%. Their games without Chris Paul is like 66%. I know the favorite stat everybody has is in games with Capella. I think they've only lost 1 game this season in games that Capella, Harden, and Chris Paul were all in. That is ridiculous. So I think healthy in the playoffs. So the 4 game is obviously a little optimistic because health and all that, what we said, and Gobert and Ingles and even Donovan Mitchell could go off for a game. So it's presumptive, but it's just not close. This is not a close game.
No, and let's be honest here. Health probably is the biggest Achilles heel for Houston, and by that I mean Chris Paul, is in his 30s. He's been hurt a lot. If he just gets hurt in the middle of the playoffs, that's probably the easiest way for them to not win a title.
That's how Portland advanced a few years back.
That's right.
I can't believe we got through all the playoffs in a reasonable amount of time, Brian. Let's get through some more topics. Let's go on to Donovan Mitchell. So this one bugs me to a degree. I got some love and hate in my feeds, which is what I love. So Donovan Mitchell. I want to see if I can read the exact quote because snotty dripping. There was an interview, and the funny thing people don't realize is that I'm mocking Donovan Mitchell for saying this, but I'm on his side because even if you agree with Donovan Mitchell, the implications mean I win. So let me just get this right. Wow, it was a while ago. Okay. Sorry. Essentially, Donovan Mitchell was asked about the Rookie of the Year race, and he said something to the effect of, okay, let's see, I can read it here. Apologies for the thing. He said, let's just say you have an exam to take June 1st, and you have a whole year to study for that exam. You're going to get a pretty good grade on that, aren't you? And then he keeps going and says, but what if other people don't have as much time to prepare? And the implication being, Ben Simmons got more time with his team, ergo, he's not a real rookie, and I hate this argument. If Donovan Mitchell wants to argue, I'm the first rookie since the joke I made was Tyreek Evans, because Blake Griffin also averaged over 20 points a game. But if Donovan Mitchell wants to say, I'm the first rookie since Tyreek Evans to score over 20 points a game, that's why I deserve Rookie of the Year, fine. Again, that's a yay points argument. We don't agree that 15-8-8 is the most incredible rookie performance since like Chris Paul. So we don't agree. If he wants to say, I have the record, the league record now, which I doubt he'll keep because of how the NBA is changing. He has the record for most threes put up by a rookie. That's great. If he wants to say his team's making it to the playoffs or at the time, right, my team is almost won the division or is about to win the division race, he could have said that. This bullshit about if Ben Simmons counts as a rookie just irks me. And all the people that have been doing that, it is just stupid. The NBA has a set of rules for what qualifies you as a rookie. This is how any award or whatever works. Here are the criteria that let you qualify for that award. As long as they fulfill that, we're done arguing. And so I'm really irked that we're getting into this level of, well, Ben Simmons isn't a real rookie. But the reason I love this quote by Donovan Mitchell is Donovan Mitchell played at Louisville under Rick Pitino. And don't forget, this is a team that has scandals with the FBI right now about pay to play. So actually trying to funnel in players.
Oh, maybe he got some money in college. Good job, Donovan Mitchell.
But here's what I was going to say about that. He is arguing. And some people are saying I'm putting words in his mouth. I'm not. This is what he said. He's saying Ben Simmons got an advantage over him. Donovan Mitchell got to play a full season under one of the best head coaches in NCAA basketball history, at least by conventional wisdom, and I have no reason to doubt that. at one of the top programs, right? I think Louisville either won a title or made it to the Final Four within the last 5 years. I was looking them up on Wikipedia. He is saying it would have been an advantage for him to have broken his foot and rehabbed for a season on the bench of an NBA team over playing for one of the top college programs under one of the top coaches. If people agree with him, which I don't actually disagree, I win because we hate the NCAA on this thing. We think it serves no purpose. We think that really it benefits the people in the NCAA like Patino who get paid money off of free labor. It benefits the NBA because they get a free farm system they don't have to pay. But we think it hurts the players. We don't think it helps them. And not just Donovan Mitchell, Ben Simmons earlier this year had an interview about if he learned anything at LSU, and he said not really. He said it was a waste of time, and then it was much more useful to be around the team. So both Ben Simmons and Donovan Mitchell are agreeing that college for top players is a waste of time versus just being around an NBA team, which I consider that a win. If people, and he's not going to win it, by the way. Donovan Mitchell is not winning Rookie of the Year over Ben Simmons, in large part because people love narratives. And for those that weren't watching, Ben Simmons put up a triple-double against LeBron James and hit a buzzer or game-winning free throws to win the game by 2 to secure the number 3 seed, whereas Donovan Mitchell went, I think, 17 shots, scored 17 points on 23 shots to lose the thing. So the advantage is there was about a decade ago, Chris Paul lost the MVP race to Kobe Bryant, and what it came down to was end of the season. Lakers play the New Orleans, Oklahoma City. I forget where they're playing at the time. Beat the Hornets, I want to say. He was on the Hornets, I think, at the time. I hate New Orleans teams for how many name changes they have. But basically, the Lakers beat the Hornets 1-on-1, and people were like, Kobe because of this last game. So it's the same thing here. Their narratives of the 76ers needed to beat the Cavaliers to win the 3 seed, and I keep confusing their names, apologies. And Ben Simmons put up a great game, and they did. And the Jazz needed to beat the Trailblazers to win the number 3 seed, and Mitchell put up a stinker, so they didn't. That narrative is, I think, enough to say. Although, everybody thought Hillary was going to win and didn't, so maybe Mitchell will be our.
As we sit here on, April 12th, 2018, on the verge of a constitutional crisis. But in terms of Mitchell and Simmons go, they so I'll bring a few numbers here, even though we're trying to be the eye test this episode. I don't know of any data or research that says, when college players come to the league versus, high school players, it affects how they play. All I know of is the NBA age curve, right? Which says that young players start out not very good. It's likely they're going to improve a lot every year until they get to be 25. At that point, they're in their peak until about 30, and at that point, we expect them to decline. Now, players follow different paths than that. That's just the average, but that's what we expect, right? So what I'm trying to say is, if we're really talking about who has an advantage or not, it's not when they came to the league, it's their age. And both these guys are 21, and Ben Simmons is about a month and a half older than Donovan Mitchell. So they're the same age. I think this is a stupid conversation in terms of the numbers. Now, that being said, Donovan Mitchell's winning me over with all these hoodies and various comments. I think he's trolling. I think based on him liking and retweeting your hateful tweets and other people's, I think he gets it, and he's a smart guy, and he's just trolling everyone. So I like Donovan Mitchell. And I do agree with Ben Simmons on this part, though. He said if his argument is I'm not a rookie, and that's the only argument he has, I'm in pretty good shape, and by that means to win the award. So I think Simmons is right on that.
Now that we have historical precedent. So this I want is key. I want to get this argument out there because, as mentioned, I get this reputation as a Donovan Mitchell hater. Just to make sure I've said this on air a few times so it's clear, I don't hate Donovan Mitchell. If you're a huge Donovan Mitchell fan and think he's the best player on the Jazz, you're the person I have a problem with. And if you're someone who doesn't follow me on Twitter but then finds my Donovan Mitchell tweets and has to come on to yell at me, you're the person I have a problem with. So just so we're clear there. But Donovan Mitchell and Kristaps Porzingis this season, it was just kind of very gut punchy where Ethan Strauss, one of the best beat writers for the Golden State Warriors back in the day, has since been let go. He named the Yay points thesis like a decade ago, and we've had all this belief that the NBA stats have advanced, and the mainstream people are still falling for points equals good without caring about efficiency. But that being said, so for Donovan Mitchell, we have historical precedent for Rookie of the Year in a few stances. And I'm going to say there are two criteria for the award based on past voters that I am okay using. The first is this player was the best player in their rookie class playing in the NBA. And rookie class meaning any player that is playing their first NBA game this season. And so, for instance, like Chris Paul falls into this category, right? Karl Anthony Towns a few years back falls in the category. This player is the best player in the NBA that qualifies as a rookie. The other criteria I could give it to is this player appears to have the most upside. And so some examples are Kevin Durant and LeBron James. Kevin Durant and LeBron James were below average NBA players. In fact, Kevin Durant was terrible. He was a bad NBA player their rookie season, but they looked like they had promise. So that it could be, the most likely to succeed yearbook award. That's another way to look at the Rookie of the Year race. And I'm saying historical precedent supports both of these arguments. Now, the problem is Ben Simmons wins both of those, right? Ben Simmons looks like but like I just said, the stat line he put up this year has only been done in NBA history by MVP players. That's all I got to say there.
And just to throw a third thing in there, point guards are way more important than shooting guards. Like, even if Donovan Mitchell plays his shooting guard role very well, he's just not going to contribute as much to winning as Ben Simmons would with the ball in his hand all the time.
You're bringing up an argument that I'll say again, which is rough, which is like when we're comparing Michael Jordan versus LeBron James, the rough part is LeBron James was able to play 1 through 5, at least in his time. Michael Jordan was like a 2-3, which is great. It's just the NBA, and we're sorry, because of how it was constructed, which is a hoop 10 feet off the ground, loves people that are able to play as centers, and then also people that are able to hold the ball. And there are some players like Ben Simmons, like LeBron James, that they can do everything, and other players, even if they're very good, like Michael Jordan, just don't live up to it. Now, I will give this just last note. Michael Jordan is easily the most impactful player in NBA history. I have no problem with that. So like LeBron James, no matter what he does for the rest of his career, won't touch that. But LeBron James is my number one all-time player. But just getting back to those two criteria, I see a very real point for Ben Simmons winning both of those. And Donovan Mitchell, like I said, comes in second place for maybe most likely to succeed based on eye test and all this other stuff. The age curve says, right, like he is a slightly below average rookie, according to our numbers. I think if you look at historical rates of rookies, right, I think he's like a 0.4 wins per 48. I think rookies tend to fall at about 0.5, so I think he's a little below average. Age curve, he's probably going to improve. If he gets a few things under control, he could become a much better player. So I'm not worried about him becoming a good player. Now, I'm not going to be like the people, like I said, I'm throwing shade at that are like, he's clearly going to be a star. You don't know. Like, if you're not a star in the NBA, there's no guarantee of anything. He's definitely second place for that definition of the Rookie of the Year award. The problem, though, is if we're using is he a real rookie? We have a historical precedent. I keep bringing this up. Blake Griffin was a unanimous MVP award winner his rookie season, and he sat on the bench for a season first. Historical
unanimous Rookie of the Year, right? Not MVP.
Sorry, did I say MVP? Rookie of the Year winner. Thank you for keeping me in check, Brian. Blake Griffin has historical precedent. We're like Supreme Court justicing this thing. There is no argument against Ben Simmons. The NBA voter criteria has historical precedent saying Ben Simmons, by that logic, is still Rookie of the Year. If Donovan Mitchell is conceding, Ben Simmons is a better player. And that's I've said that. Ben Simmons has said that. A few of my followers have said that. He shouldn't be arguing this definition of what is a rookie. He should be arguing for his production, because that definition will fail in court. So that being said, we're happy Ben Simmons is going to win Rookie of the Year, hopefully.
Yeah, and that's why I like, again, to go back to politics, that's why I enjoy Donovan Mitchell's social media presence here. He seems to be making the political argument instead of the legal argument, and to me that's very entertaining. So good job, Donovan Mitchell and your hoodies.
To our last NBA topic before coming back to Billy Mitchell, even though that's the order of our script. So Russell Westbrook becomes the first player in NBA history to average triple doubles back-to-back. Now, the asterisk, I don't know if you recall, there was a movie about Roger Maris,
yes,
directed by Billy Crystal, called 61 Asterisk, because when Roger Maris broke Babe Ruth's home run record, they wanted to put an asterisk on it. Here's the key. Russell Westbrook went into the last game of the NBA season needing to get 16 rebounds to average a triple-double for the season. He already had points and assists locked up. They were playing the Memphis Grizzlies, who have been out of it and obviously tanking for a while. All of their stars have been sitting. Russell Westbrook went out and put up I think 6 point, 19 rebounds, 16 assists. Does that sound right, Brian? Game?
I didn't look at that box score, but that's a hell of a box score.
Yeah, weird. So I'll get back to that in a sec. And, the shade people are throwing is Russell Westbrook just went and padded his stats to get that triple-double. And there are a few things. You have his quote, and I'll let you read it because I know you have it up in front of you. And while you're doing that, I'll just look up the box score to clarify.
Yeah, a lot of people make jokes about stat padding rebounds. If people could get 20 rebounds every night, they would. If people could get fucking 15 rebounds a night, they would. And that's the quote, and you can kind of keep going along those lines. He's 100% right. That's one of the most analytic statements I've ever heard from an NBA player. We hear a few of those every year, and it reminds me almost exactly about an article on Boxscore Geeks. I can't remember who wrote it, maybe Patrick, about low usage players that have high true shooting in the NBA. Very difficult to do. Rebounding is the same thing. Westbrook is 100% right here.
It actually, if we had a full-time paid producer who could go through the archives, that statement that Russell Westbrook just went off on, I think is like almost verbatim, because Patrick was saying that players fucking do this if they could. And I apologize to Russell Westbrook. Just to clarify, 6 points, 20 rebounds, 19 assists, 2 steals. Amazing game. And there's a few things about that. I agree with Russell Westbrook's point. Now, there are a few other things that bug me. One is people going, he's just doing this for, to pad his stats. Who gives a fuck? The fact of the matter is in the NBA, and this is the same was true of Donovan Mitchell. There was a point in this season where Donovan Mitchell had 19.8 points per game. And I was like, I'm going to keep bashing that, but like hell, he doesn't finish the season above 20 points per game. Because he knows if I get over 20 points per game, that means a ton. Yep. He knows. NBA player, we've said this forever, NBA players in this weird game of front offices and coaches and players and whatever, understanding what they're doing. Players understand what gets them recognized and understand what gets them paid. And a player going out of their way to get a stat, like for instance, Russell Westbrook at this point is putting together a Hall of Fame resume, right? He's already won MVP, and I believe the numbers basically say if you've won an MVP, you've locked first ballot. But that being said, Russell Westbrook realized at this point, I am putting together a resume that's going to talk about my legacy forever. And if getting 2 triple doubles, which is something no player in NBA history has ever done back to back, if him doing that helps his legacy, he understands the importance of it. That should not be a problem. In fact, people that get upset with players like padding their stats or trying to make their stats look good, it's like, listen, that's how they get paid. That's them doing their job. If the NBA paid players to win games, and look at the stats that we like, or drafted players to win games, that's, Dave Barry, giving a shout out to that, gave a really nice article about the WNBA draft, and it looks like the WNBA still has a lot of problems like the NBA, meaning a lot of the top prospects going into the WNBA draft are not the most productive players. Dave Barry basically says there are a ton of sleeper players going into this year's WNBA draft compared to the mock draft boards, which we've seen in the NBA as well. If doing the things to win games is what got players played and what got them recognition and got them into the Hall of Fame and got them drafted higher, they would do it, but they understand what gets them paid. So what Russell Westbrook going, I understand triple doubles are a metric that people love. And if I do this, I'm a lock for the Hall of Fame. I'm a lock for a max contract, next contract negotiation. I have no damn problem with that. That's him doing his job. And it's so weird to me to see fans of NBA teams, and like myself included, lots of us have had day jobs where, the same thing kind of holds true for television shows, Brian. So lots of people have day jobs and will watch a television show and go, oh my God, that show, How I Met Your Mother, has jumped the shark. Why is it still on the air? And the writers and actors and producers and crew can raise their hand and go, this is our job. And there's no guarantee we're ever going to get another one of these jobs that pays this well or that's successful. So as long as the network is willing to give us money, we're going to keep producing content that says, will Ted get with Robin? No. Will Ted get with Robin? No. Will Ted get with Robin? And then eventually, yes. We'll keep doing that. And the same is true of basketball players. As long as someone says it's okay for you to take the shot, and if you do that, I'm going to give you a max contract, players will do that. And lots of us have had jobs where we do stuff. We phone in days where they, like when I used to work at Target, there were days that I'm like, I didn't do my best. And it's like, well, they gave me money. I'm going to come back the next day. So it's kind of like, it's a weird mentality to have of these people to say, why are these people doing things that they know gets them paid instead of just doing it for some amorphous love of the game? I'm going to throw it out there like the Easter Bunny, Brian. This weird belief that sports are this pure thing with playing for competition or spirit or whatever is bullshit.
Oh, yeah.
It's business. It's been a business forever. That was one of my favorite Cracked articles, which is like even the ancient Olympics in Greece, the athletes got paid lots of money and maybe tanked and did all this other stuff. Sports is a business. The athletes understand it. I have absolutely no problem with it. The last capper on this is the Memphis Grizzlies have been tanking for weeks now. This game had no merit because it did not matter if the Oklahoma City Thunder won or lost, I believe, because what had to happen, I think, right, is like that Portland-Utah game. It was in the hands of that game. If Portland wins, actually, no, maybe I'm wrong. I think because Portland lost, I can't remember. I think it might have been out of their hands or it was just obvious. It's like this game was mostly meaningless because they weren't playing a good team, which means for most people, there's no freaking reason to tune in and watch. So if before the game, Russell Westbrook said, you know what? I only need 16 rebounds to get a triple-double for the season. I'm going to go for the record tonight. I'd have tuned in to watch that game. In fact, I'm wondering if some people did. It is we've talked about this, and we're going to have to talk about this more in depth. It's a great offseason topic, Brian, about how it is a bad thing for the NBA business model that teams that can't make the playoffs have no incentive to try, and that makes the end of the regular season boring. And teams that have similar thing happened, right? LeBron James out east, because Philadelphia beat the crap out of Milwaukee. Because that happened, Cleveland could not win the number 3 seed. They were stuck at number 4. And so LeBron James, I believe, came in just long enough to get 10 points because he has a record going too of the streak of longest 10-point games in NBA. He has a streak going like that and came in just to play his 82nd game of the NBA season and then left. And people were like, he's padding his stats. Well, the problem is if there are meaningless games where there's no playoff implications on the line and teams have an incentive to lose because of tanking, things that make people tune in to watch, like watching for stat milestones, is a good thing. So I'm not only am I against the people who are mad at Russell Westbrook for doing this, I'm on Russell Westbrook's side in every step of the way because he's maximizing his brand. I'm also saying this actually makes the NBA a product worth tuning in for in some cases. So people that are mad at it, shut up.
Yeah, and in terms of just the production side, this is really interesting to me because we were talking about Donovan Mitchell a little bit earlier, right? Shooting guard's just not as an important of a position. He doesn't get as many opportunities playing shooting guard as he would if he were a center or a point guard, for instance, right? So this is so interesting about Westbrook to me. Like, even though he's a point guard, this is one example of how he's so good that no matter what position or role he decides to do, he can just excel. If he doesn't want to handle the ball as much or shoot from the outside, he can just move near the basket and grab all these rebounds. Like, I think it's incredible that, you know, again, you're talking about Ben Simmons being able to guard all these positions. Westbrook is one of those players too, and you know, it's just an example of how good he is.
Well, also, what I'll say about like Westbrook versus Mitchell, and this just has always bugged me, is that idea of stealing rebounds, right? I've heard this freaking meme all the time. And by the way, for what it's worth, as we've mentioned,
well, he's stealing them from the other team, right? He's down there like...
The wins produced formula agrees that for defensive rebounds, roughly half of the time you get a defensive rebound, that defensive rebound would have gone to the team. So the wins produced math, like not the recipe, the actual math, goes forward and looks at your rate of rebounding versus your team's and either penalizes you or rewards you based on your rate of defensive rebounding compared to the team. So we already have that factored in. So when we love Russell Westbrook, we've already factored in that argument. But the argument he's stealing rebounds is always weird to me because the two things you can steal are, to a degree, defensive rebounds, which we factor in for, and shots. And so it's weird to me to see people say he's stealing defensive rebounds, and you go, well, Donovan Mitchell is stealing shots. He's shooting below average. Yeah. There are players on his team, Joe Ingles, Ricky Rubio, this season, which is bizarre. Ricky Rubio is actually having a good shooting season, I believe. Rudy Gobert, all of these players shoot above average. Even if you believe the usage curve, you're not maximizing the usage curve, keeping these people too far left and him too far right. He's stealing shots from his teammate. Again, we don't think that's... We agree with the phraseology, I guess, stealing shots, because there's only one ball. You can only have one player shoot. But we don't disagree with the player's mentality. So it just... I hate the weird logic that goes into some players, which is like, they're shirking on defense, so they're a bad player. And you can raise your hand and go, they're players that shirk on offense. Why aren't you as mad? You go, they're stealing rebounds. You can raise your hand and go, well, they're players that steal shots. Why aren't you as mad as them? So that's really my only point here. Is it's a weird one for the arguments people have about that kind of thing, stealing rebounds, padding stats. It's like that kind of logic applies to every single 20-point scorer that's close to average that there's ever been. The players like Carmelo Anthony, Allen Iverson, Donovan Mitchell that we don't like.
And just last thing on this, then we can maybe do some Billy Mitchell, but it's all Mitchells, Dre. Donovan Mitchell, Billy Mitchell. But no, it's like, so is that Memphis game not the most important minutes? Not really. But then there's also like, all these clutch time minutes. So if you look, a play like Westbrook plays, well over 2,000 minutes. Some of those minutes are going to be important. Some of them are going to be less important. Some of those teams are good. Some are bad. But together, that's enough minutes to even out and get a very clear picture of how good Westbrook is, regardless of his competition.
All right. Love it. Okay. So we have to get this in. This has been a weird backstory, and I'll throw in some extra information I have on it. So Billy Mitchell, for those of you who don't know, there was a documentary a few years ago called The King of Kong. It's about the world record in the Donkey Kong arcade game. Fun note, downtown Appleton now has an arcade bar that opened downtown today, so that's cool. Anyway, so Billy Mitchell is the former record holder of the Donkey Kong arcade game. There is a documentary about a player named Steve Wiebe trying to take the Donkey Kong arcade high score. It's worth noting that this documentary, I'll throw this out there too, Brian, the documentary is really weird, and I think it's kind of been left untouched in terms of a lot of this controversy we're going to talk in a second, but there's a lot of weirdness with that maybe we'll talk on a future show. Nice off-season topic. But Billy Mitchell was accused of cheating for his Donkey Kong high scores recent. So he had the old high score that was live, and then he had some newer high scores that were recorded, and all of the evidence basically says that those things, it gets too complicated to explain all of the ways that it was likely cheating, but they are basically saying the videos are fraudulent and he cheated to get these records. And so Twin Galaxies, this organization that was kind of responsible for holding all the high scores for video games, has stripped all of his records and kicked him out, essentially, which is a huge deal, because there was a lot of back and forth where he was accused of cheating and cheating these records, and people going, why aren't you kicking him out? To give you some backstory, Twin Galaxies was started by a man named Walter Day in the 80s to hold video game high-scored records. It's ludicrous how bad this stat organization is. For sports fans that have had things like StatsInc and the fact that we have 100 years of data for baseball and like 40 years of data for basketball, and we're getting better and better stats. Essentially, this guy just let people write it and say, here's my video game high score, and took it at face value. And there have been lots of controversies. So Twin Galaxies used to be the repository for high scores, did have kind of a judge process for accepting videotapes, but even that was sketch. Part of the reason being Billy Mitchell was a major shareholder in the company. And so him having high records in there was a conflict of interest. Also, there were many people who were judges. These are people that decide if high scores went into Twin Galaxies that were also record holders. So you can see lots of conflict of interest that this organization had. It's every bit as bad as it sounds. There's been a lot of controversy surrounding some of the biggest names in the Twin Galaxies database. And my personal take, and some others have said this, there's a guy named Tipster who's a great YouTube personality that's talked a lot about this. My personal take is you just got to burn it down. Twin Galaxies, all of the records that were held there as an organization just failed. You really just kind of need to start over with video game, speedrun high scores, arcade game high scores. That organization has proven itself to be flawed. So Billy Mitchell is this big name. The two things he's well known for is being the first player to get a perfect game in Pac-Man and a high score at Donkey Kong. His Donkey Kong record is stripped. Pac-Man gets fascinating. There's a guy named Dwayne Richards, I think, who did a documentary called The King of Controversy about how Billy Mitchell basically, I don't want to say cheated his way into the Pac-Man high score, but he basically convinced another competitor to wait to try and get the high score, and then got it ahead of time in a non-live playing scenario. And the reason it gets interesting is he's in the Guinness Book of World Records with this high score at 5.5 hours. I've heard some claim from other people that he took over 6 hours to beat the game, and that the Guinness Book of World Records criteria for getting that high score is you were only allowed to take a 5-minute break every hour. And they assert that Billy Mitchell took more time than he was allowed for his breaks. And by the way, in an arcade game, the way you can take breaks is like because you have like barrels that are coming down, or like in Pac-Man you're going around, there are places where you can place your character like Mario and Donkey Kong, or like the Pac-Man character in Pac-Man, such that the game runs, you're in no danger of dying, but you can get up and leave. So that's what we mean there. But there's been some assertion that his Pac-Man score might not be legit, that Twin Galaxies might have fudged the numbers to make it legit for the Guinness Book of World Records. So anyway, it's a huge deal that basically he has been proven basically by a panel of judges that is about as unbiased as you can get at this point. There were even some people on Billy Mitchell's side that have come out and said, nah, there's absolutely no way he didn't get these high scores without cheating. It's a huge deal that all of this has happened. And then the note I'll give too that gets kind of nuts, which is why it's been at the back of my mind, is his Pac-Man score is also in question to me too. And I've actually emailed the Guinness Book of World Records a few times to say, hey, can you tell me what the guidelines he had to follow to get this record were? And their response, this is messed up. So I'm actually going to say, when you think there's an organization that is an expert at something, and so this is Twin Galaxies for that, this is Guinness Book of World Records for whatever world records, you have to be careful as to why you've given them that authority. And I found the same problem with trusting things like the ABPR community in basketball. We find these things online and people are like, we are the authority. And I'm not saying that authority isn't good and expertise is bad. In fact, I'm kind of, the Trump era of this country is very frustrating for people to ignore experts. But you have to be careful when you find a group that's an expert in something. It's at least worth saying, excuse me, why are you the expert? And in Twin Galaxy's case, it was just one guy that decided to do it and one guy that staked him money. And if you actually start digging at their process and everything, you're like, oh, I shouldn't trust you. So Guinness Book of World Records, I emailed them a few times to say, can you just tell me what the criteria for him getting this record was? And they basically said, the only way you can get a criteria for a world record is to submit an application. I don't know if you know this, you have to pay Guinness Book of World Records to apply for an application for a world record. So like, I can't just like get the world. I can't just get the world record for like podcasting and saying the word basketball the most times. I have to apply to the Guinness Book of World Records, say I'm going for this record. Here's how I'm going to go for it. And they basically will respond and say, here are the criteria that you're going to have to do to fulfill that. And additionally, they can, in some cases, they can throw it out, right? There are people that might say, here's the award. This is the record I'm going for. And Guinness can say, that we're not putting that on our book. So, things like I'm going to, pogo stick for the longest time. I believe that is a real world record. That's when they'd say, absolutely, here's what you have to do. Here's what fulfills it. Here's how you win the record, etc. But to apply to get a world record, you have to pay them a bunch of money and apply, and they won't tell you the guidelines till you apply. So this makes the Guinness Book of World Records, in my opinion, even more sketchy. So Billy Mitchell, the two claims to fame are Twin Galaxies and the Guinness Book of World Records. And the reason he got into the Guinness Book of World Records, to my understanding, is Twin Galaxies. Billy Mitchell, the Guinness Book of World Records, I also question too. So this is weird to see. I realize I'm all over the place and it doesn't relate to basketball at all. So thank you for listening if you did. But essentially, this gets really bizarre because this story is essentially burning to the ground, in my opinion, an entire subset of world record holders and record holding communities, which is what's like fascinating to watch from an outside perspective, since we are nerds in our own stat community.
Yeah, and it's funny. You mentioned the documentary, right? King of Kong. That came out in 2007. And that is kind of a significant period of time for gaming because it was sort of considered, I mean, maybe people say 2008 is the streaming revolution, but that's when streams really started to pick up. Twitch came around around that time, and competitive gaming got really big time. Now we have esports or whatever you want to call it, right? There's other communities that don't consider themselves esports, just competitive gaming. And the industry has really picked up since then. There's a lot more money in it. We're talking about the NBA. There is a big article that we haven't talked about on the show yet from a few weeks ago saying that, the NBA went big time into esports, and now 13 different NBA teams have ownerships in esports franchises in all kinds of different games, right? So it's gotten big, but right when this movie, about Billy Mitchell and Steve Wiebe hit, that was kind of the beginning of coming out of the shadows for competitive gaming. And when I've said in the past that I'm a little more skeptical of esports than you at times, it's because of that 20-year history or even 30-year history in classic gaming's case, like with Twin Galaxies, before 2008, that it was in the shadows. And there's a lot of grassroots kind of scumbag competitive gaming schemes where there's a lot of cheating and there's not a lot of money. and people just kind of care about winning for whatever reason, right? And they're willing to cheat. So, yeah, I would think that not just in classic gaming, but in other gaming, and the scene I'm from, Magic the Gathering, rife with cheaters back in the day, maybe even now. So, yeah, this is true for, I think, all different kinds of small grassroots scenes.
Well, to be fair, what's funny to your point there is I almost relate this. This might even get back to my point where I'm positive about esports for that, because it's kind of like the casinos used to be more sketch, like they were run by the mob, and so did boxing. And when they started going more mainstream is when the mob got kicked out, because essentially corporate money, this is true of everything in the United States nowadays, right? Let's keep this political. Corporate money runs everything, right? So as soon as corporate money comes in, you kick out the things. And so like the reason the reason like Billy Mitchell was able to do this forever, it's like, as you point out, it's this in the shadows industry that no one really gives a damn about, a very small niche community, and he wields a big hammer. And then here's the thing, you can wield a big hammer as a big-ish name speedrunner or whatever, or high record holder in arcade games. And the minute corporate money comes in, they're like, no, you are nothing. If you take us to court, you will lose. You can intimidate some Canadian guy that plays video games for fun. You can intimidate that guy with legal action, and he has to quit because he can't afford to take you on legally. But if you take on any major corporation, they will laugh at you. They have a lawyer on retainer who is better than any lawyer you have and will kick your ass in court. So this might be a positive thing. But it's just, to me, like I said, with Billy Mitchell, it's fascinating for a lot of parts, right? The reason it strikes home with us for basketball is like this small, close-knit community that is interested in this niche topic that has like these weird, randomly assigned experts. And then you're like, why did they get to be in control? A lot of it rings so true. But then also just watching it from a historical perspective of, oh my goodness. Like I said, the last weird thing, the last capper I'll give, if you're a fan of this, that's weird to me, is the King of Kong documentary is really weird. They leave out some important names. There are people that speculate that they basically kind of scripted the last half of it, if that makes any sense, meaning they kind of knew what was going to happen, and so they wanted to really set up the drama. And the videotape that has proven Billy Mitchell a cheater was included in that documentary, and there are even some clips in that movie where they are questioning the validity of the videotape. I would not be doubtful to believe that a film company, and so I forget the director's name, if you can look that up for me real quick, the director of King of Kong, because he's gone on to be a big name in Hollywood. I would not doubt that, in them filming everybody all the time, wasn't able to go, there is a problem with your tape, and here's the thing, we can out you as a cheater, or we can finish our documentary and make it a good documentary, and I can make a good movie and win film festivals with this. So I'm curious about what the King of Kong movie itself, it's kind of escaped any explicit fire in this backlash against Billy Mitchell. But I think if you keep digging, I would be skeptical. I apologize for phrasing it this way, that Steve Wiebe, and who's the director of King of Kong?
Seth Gordon. He has also done Horrible Bosses 2011 and Identity Thief 2013. Yeah, so some big names in Hollywood right at this point. And he helped out Steve Wiebe. Steve Wiebe, I believe, it wasn't Horrible Bosses. There was a movie with, I think, Vince Vaughn where he showed up in a cameo. I would be curious. It may not happen, but if those names come under fire as well. It's funny you say that, Dre, because I remember a criticism of the movie at the time, and again, this is like 10 years ago, was that they portrayed Billy Mitchell as being more sketchy than the community thought he was at the time. So if anything, the movie was kind of on your side back then, but maybe that's not true. I'm not sure, because clearly they didn't find everything out,
What I'm saying is the movie could have said, oh, Billy Mitchell, you're a cheater, and we have proof that because Billy Mitchell and Todd Rogers were two big names at that time, and Todd Rogers was unearthed first. So the downfall of Billy Mitchell, we're in overtime, by the way. So if we're done with basketball, I think I actually said all of our shout outs during the show. So you're more than welcome to get going if you don't want to keep hearing this, and then I'll finish this up, Brian. But so in that, Todd Rogers and Billy Mitchell are two huge names in old arcade game fame for high scores. And Todd Rogers went down first, and we found out he was just the most explicit cheater, where he just made up scores that were impossible and just entered his own scores into the Twin Galaxies database. And so they stripped him first. then Billy Mitchell comes up, and Billy Mitchell does stuff like faking videos or using MAME. This is an emulator, something you can run on your computer to play a game, and not only just using like an arcade emulator on your machine, but also possibly doing things like using save states, or you can even have if you want to, people do this. You can program a program to play the arcade game frame by frame for you. So in theory, if you were using MAME, you could just have a playback programmed to play and record it. So that, we don't even know the explicit way Billy Mitchell cheated. Basically, it's just like they had verified this video could not have occurred the way you said it. It's a MAME tape, and the numbers look sketchy. That's what they have concluded. But so Billy Mitchell kind of cheated more like that. And so what I would say is I would be skeptical if they didn't find that out when they were filming King of Kong. And there was a lot of that in the movie. But then it seemed like both Billy Mitchell and Steve Wiebe really benefited from the success of that movie. So it almost feels like they went and said, we're just going to tell this story. If you cooperate, we'll release a documentary. And it's Donkey Kong. No one's going to give a damn. And at the time, they didn't assume, I believe, that in 10 years we would have, better software to be able to analyze videotapes to realize they were fake. So I think that was the case. I think they didn't predict, speed running classic arcade games or high scoring classic arcade games to become as big as it did. Like they didn't anticipate Twitch. But so my belief is that if people keep tugging, the King of Kong is the next thing to go. And Steve Wiebe might be under fire as well.
I disagree with that last part. I think that all the technology did exist probably to expose it back then. I don't think things have advanced in emulation very much since then. But your overall point, yeah, that's an interesting theory. It could be true.
Yep. All right. Well, we went into overtime just like the Nuggets, and disappointingly, just like the Nuggets, you didn't get any extra basketball for it. So that's been our show. I said all. I think I said all.
I have one basketball shout out, Dre, before we go.
Let's do it.
And that is Game of Zones is back. Bleacher Report's YouTube video series putting NBA players into a Game of Thrones setting. It is amazing. Go watch it. It's awesome.
Okay, actually, and I do have a shout out too. The person on Twitter, her name I believe is Ina D, and it's Inadog, INADOG. There was a fantastic thing. So Nate Duncan has become a pretty big name, especially in the Warriors. Big podcasting with Danny LaRue. Definitely respect them as content producers.
They're very hardworking.
Don't know if I agree with all of their statistics. I would say they're better than average, so I'll give them that. Right, like they're pundits that I'm like they don't know what the hell they're talking about. They're better than average, but I guess the Donovan Mitchell, Ben Simmons point came up on Nate Duncan's podcast, and he was like, well, Ben Simmons is a better player, but Donovan Mitchell is a better offensive player. And Ina D, there's this great Twitter thread. You sent it along to me where she just tears in and breaks down the numbers and like goes, how can you assume that based on these numbers? And then I even got to get some in that he didn't respond to it, but I at least know that Nate Duncan saw, where I brought up some like usage numbers using time of possession and stuff. So it's fantastic. A great follower, a great Ben Simmons fan, also a Will Barton fan. So extra points. So that's my shout out for the week.
Yeah, and that shout out to IND as well. Those are my shout outs.
Cool. Well, that's been our show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com for tools and analysis, sometimes nerdnumbers.com for written content. You can find our podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geek Show. Subscribe, upvote, it helps us out. We go live every week, twitch.tv/nerdnumbers. It is 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Brian. We've gotten that down. It is usually Tuesday, sometimes Thursday, depending on if the NBA season is ending. And if you missed the live show, you can catch the recap on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I've been your host, Ray Alvarez. You can find me on Twitter and everywhere on the internet as Nerd Numbers. Co-host Brian Foster, you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. That's been our show. We'll see you next time.